Perhaps 45's remarks at Mount Rushmore on Friday will become known as the super the, the super hate-filled racist rhetoric um, spreader speech, where a few dozen people, nearly all unmasked, sat next to each other on chairs actually tied together, which prevented social distancing, and wrapped attention, and thereby duplicated the monstrally dangerous stunt 45 recently pulled where he had his Klan rally in Tulsa. Maybe it will be vaguely remembered as the worst Independence Day speech in American history, and it says embedded it will be also known as the totalitarian speech, or totalitarianism speech. It was not simply his slurred speech. 45 also mangled the pronunciation of Ulysses Grant, as if he had never seen the name in print of the Union general who clobbered the Confederate generals. 45 still tries to venerate. That conveyed the impression that there was something just not right with the 45th squatter. It was not merely 45's sweaty, oddly colored pallor, his squinting to read the teleprompter, or the uneven pacing of his reading, which at times threatened or even promised to grind to a halt. No, it was the darkly aggressive and fascistic substance of his speech, positing that his enemies want to destroy America and eradicate its history. This was a bookend, and one hopes the final chapter speech to the Carnage inauguration speech, which former President George W. Bush aptly called it some weird shit. This one was even weirder. It was more in the vein of info whores Lord-ass Jones than his advisor Stephen Miller. The radical ideology attack in our country advances under the banner of social justice, but in truth it would demolish both justice and society. 45 said, perhaps in reference to the Black Lives Matter protests that seek an end to systemic racism. It would transform justice into an instrument of division and vengeance, and turn out free society into a place of repression, domination, and exclusion. They want to silence us, but we will not be silenced. I actually have no idea what the fuck he is talking about, but it is all froth, anger, and white resentment at this point. His enemies are other Americans. His understanding of American greatness is utterly defective. Reform, progress, and inclusion are threats to his base, oozing with white power. Somehow, in 45's view, the people who want to stop the renovation of traitorous white nationalists who took up arms against the United States harbor a radical view of American history that is a web of lies. The squatter who calls the media the enemy of the people says others, meaning fellow Americans are trying to silence us, which means his voters and whites. Left unmentioned were the roughly 130,000 Americans that had died from the COVID-19. Although he did thank the first responders, he had nothing to say about the victims of the pandemic, and that he had ignored and then botched. He surely did not mention his son, his ugly ass son, Don Jr.'s girlfriend, dumb skank Kimberly Guilfoyle, who tested positive for COVID-19, which is a reminder that reality doesn't heed insane rhetoric. When all a squatter has to offer is paranoia and a statuary garden. Note, Washington, D.C. is home to statues of many of the people that 45 listed, so perhaps he needs to get out more, directed at his hardcore inbred cultists who live in trailers, who buy into his blood and soil nationalism and his contempt for anything that sounds like social justice. You have to wonder if he even knows how to win the general election. This surely was not designed to win back voters he desperately needs in November. Now, if you were looking for normalcy, sanity, and actual patriotism, and something uplifting, you should read former Vice President Joe Biden's July 4th op-ed. His vision of America is one of ever-expanding freedom, something that 45 doesn't offer. This is exactly a quote that Biden had wrote in. Our democracy rose up from the ground when we ended slavery and ratified the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It rose higher when women fought for suffrage and won. It was fortified when a lawyer named Thurgood Marshall persuaded the Supreme Court to strike down separate but equal and blaze a trail for opportunity in Brown vs. Board of Education. And when our nation opened its eyes to the viciousness of Bull Connor and the righteousness of the Freedom Riders, and responded with outrage and a new Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, we built it stronger together. And in Biden's view, there is not a them and an us, but one country seeking to fulfill its promise. However, imperfectly in each generation. Title 9. The Indian Self-Determination Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, marriage equality, also known as, and then DACA, Black Lives Matter, brick by brick, and all too often, against the law gods and violent opposition, the American people have labored to expand that scope, strength, and meaning of American democracy. Which is what Biden had wrote. He called Independence Day a celebration of a persistent march toward greater justice, the natural expansion of our founding notion from all men are created equal to all people are created equal and should be treated equally throughout their lives. Biden does not want to go to war with fellow Americans. He does not spew venom nor ignore the all-encompassing national crisis in which we find ourselves in. Rebuilding and expanding our democracy are essential to the long-term vitality of our nation, he vowed. That's why, as squatter, I will take immediate action to reverse the damage 45 has done to our core democratic rights and institutions. He promised to restore and protect voting rights as well as to set about immediately reversing 45's cruel and counterproductive asylum travel ban and family separation policies, and reaffirming our innate identity reflected in our Constitution, emblazoned in the Statue of Liberty as a nation of immigrants, pledging to undo racism and root out inequities from unfairly administered COVID-19 recovery refunds to laws that perpetrate racial wealth gaps, to health disparities, to housing policy, to policing, to our justice system, and everywhere in between. Biden offers a vision of a country that stands ready to lead again, not by the example of power, but by the the power of example. You can have that guy, or the raving paranoid lunatic that's peddling hate and dystopia. The choice is not even close.